A very warm welcome and good evening to our Leela community and to our special guest, Professor Camille Gear Rich. We're delighted to have you back, Camille. We have been looking forward to continuing our series, our dialogues on diversity. And this evening's topic is particularly interesting. It's one that many of you have shared that you were keen to hear more about. And this evening's topic is, of course, how do I talk to my child about race? So we're going to invite Professor Gear Rich to give her presentation, which I believe will be interactive. At the end, we'll turn on the chat, and Juliet, our Director of Diversity and Admissions, will facilitate the question and answer session. I say in anticipation, thank you everyone in the Leela community, parents, faculty and staff for joining us. And I'm going to turn over to you, Camille, and we very much look forward to your thought-provoking presentation on how do I talk to my child about race.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. And because we are pressed for time, I'm just going to mention that my two partners are here tonight. Carol Ross Burnett, who's a partner with me at Rich Diversity Consulting, and Renee Smith-Maddox. They were both here with me. You're probably going to see them more in the days and weeks and months going forward. We formed a partnership in order to ensure that we can provide Leela with the level of attention that it deserves. So again, welcome to you all. Thank you for coming tonight. Hope you enjoy the presentation, and I will go ahead and get us started. Okay, great. Okay, great. So our presentation tonight is how to talk to your children about race. It is going to be interactive. I just want to confirm with Stephanie that our polls are up and working. Is that true?
I'm working on it. I couldn't do it before the meeting started. So I'm working on it. The first one is ready.
Okay, great.
Another one.
We have a little bit of time before we get there, so it should be totally fine. Thank you, Stephanie, for your help. I appreciate it. And hopefully you'll have fun with the polls. I think sometimes these questions can be kind of hard. And so what's nice about the polls is they give people an opportunity to weigh in without that public display of what their opinion is. But what I want to emphasize tonight is that this is not a space of judgment. This is a space of learning. Sometimes I purposely pick scenarios that are kind of hard. A lot of the options I hope will seem attractive to you, and it's because they surface different kinds of concerns. They come from different places of defensible values that you may be trying to sort through as you make sense of what your action should be in a particular circumstance. And so I encourage people to speak up. One caveat is I will say to you, your child should probably not be here with you. So I've noticed in some of the other sessions, people have their children present. It can be that awkward moment when the scenario hits a little bit too close to home, or when your child chimes in a way that you don't expect. And so I'm just encouraging you, this is probably parents only space, and that maybe your kids can kind of read a book or play a board game or something, because no one's playing video games, right, in this era of COVID. But anyway, they'll find something to do. Okay, onward. All right, so this slide is just a little bit about me. I've taught at a variety of schools across the country about racial ambiguity, racial fluidity, multiracials. My primary area of interest is how race plays a role in identity development, the opportunities it creates, the fears that may be triggered as a consequence of some experiences you have with bias and discrimination, and the ways in which we create spaces that affirm difference rather than making people feel defensive or marginalized. Okay, we're going to go straight into hypotheticals. What you'll see is there is a number of different stories I'll present to you, and then I'll present you with a number of options in terms of the actions that a parent might take in that circumstance. Again, there will be sort of better answers and less strong answers, but all of them really should seem like perfectly reasonable responses to you. It's just to emphasize how difficult this is and how a little bit of information can really help give you a lot of power in negotiating the space. You will still have to make decisions that are uniquely tailored to your child's maturity level, the experiences your child has had, what you know about your child's anxieties. The most important bit of information in this is to trust yourself and your understanding and your knowledge about how your child is reacting to things. You can challenge them with new information and new nuggets and see how that information is received, and then sort of slow things down as you get more information about how your child reacts, okay? But the most important data you're going to get is the feedback from your child about how the information is being absorbed. I want you to pay attention to that. There's no one size fits all for everyone. Okay, so here we are with Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc has been glued to CNN and other cable news networks over the past several days, watching the involving coverage of storming the Capitol. Sorry, we have a little typo there, it should be with an O. Or the Stop the Steal aftermath, and protests that invaded the Capitol building. His daughter Lacey wanders in as he's shutting off his computer and ending the streaming service that had been broadcasting that evening. She turns to him and she says, "What are you watching, Daddy?" And Jean-Luc says, "Nothing." And Lacey turns to her other dad, Tom, and says, "Why is Daddy crying?" And Tom says, "Well, we'll talk about it when you're older." And Lacey says, "That was a really pretty flag. I can tell why they like it." Okay, and these are the flags that she's seeing in that quick moment on her dad's view screen there. For those of you, I'm assuming everybody knows what the Confederate flag is, right? It's a representation of the Old South and white supremacy. It's still seen as a symbol of white supremacy for Americans. Triggers a lot of anxiety, fear, and anger from a lot of people, as it is really harkening back to the Civil War and the South's desire to maintain its hold over slaves. Okay, Lacey just doesn't know any of that. She says, "That's a pretty flag, Daddy. I can tell why they like it." Okay, what should Tom do? So Tom's her other dad. A, tell Lacey to never draw the flag again, right? Because she sat down with her little coloring book and she's coloring the flag. She thinks it's so pretty. So tell Lacey to never draw the flag again and that neither daddy wants to talk about it. Tell Lacey that it's a pretty flag, but there are other better flags that she can draw. Tell Lacey that Daddy Jean-Luc is crying because he's tired and she can show him the drawing later and he will explain it then. Tell Lacey about the Confederacy, the history of slavery in the United States, and that she is a white person and has a great debt to pay back to Black people. Tell Lacey that the flag represents a time when we were divided and not treated equally kindly or kind, and that we're working so that we never return to a time when the law would allow that kind of inequality between people. So what's the best choice?
I launched the poll, right?
Great, thank you. And you may have to scroll down among the choices to get to the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm seeing 4 choices here.
I only had 4 questions in my poll.
Okay.
In what in the document I received.
Okay, so that's fine. We'll work with what we have. Is it active? Can people weigh in? Because I'm not seeing the results recorded, but it may just be my screen.
People are voting. There's
Okay, so can we do like a timer? Can we give them about a minute more to respond? Does anybody want to weigh in and talk about the choices that we see here and what their thoughts are?
How old is Lacey?
She's about, let's say she's 6 or 7.
I would be happy to weigh in. I chose E. I think that's pretty clear, but I also don't know that it matters how old Lacey is. I don't think that D would ever be appropriate at any point. I think starting with E, to say that this represents a time when we were divided and everyone wasn't treated equally is appropriate at any age, really. And and it's obviously her, no matter what her age is, she doesn't know what that flag represents. So it's a starting point versus going into everything that would be so overwhelming. I think she would probably get confused and shut down.
Okay. So this item D or option D is a non-starter for Claire. at any age. This idea about a great debt to pay back to Black people.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say not sorry ever. I would just say clearly Lacey doesn't know what the Confederate flag means, so she needs a starting point. You can get to D at some point in time as her education progresses, and it's not all, but to go from 0 to 60, I think would be overwhelming and would actually be so confusing to Lacey. She might shut down and just not want to hear about it.
Okay. So thank you for that, Claire. And by the way, you get the prize for being the first person to engage on a very difficult topic in public. So you get that prize at the end. Stephanie, can you tell us how many people have voted by now? Are we 90% or most of the way there? Oh, I think you're on the...
Vous couper, Stephanie.
Pardon, excusez-moi. 67 people voted, and we are 85.
Okay, so last call for some votes to come in. Why don't we go ahead and show the results of that poll?
Okay. So you want me to share it? Okay. Share result. Here we go. Oh gosh, I don't know what happened.
That's okay. We can keep going.
Do we all need to maybe close?
Tu arrêtes le vote, je pense, Stéphanie, et ça va calculer.
Je l'ai fait, mais je crois que j'ai fait une mauvaise manipulation. Désolée.
C'est pas grave, on te pardonne.
Je crois que tout le monde a voté. Le maximum était pour la dernière réponse.
Ok.
Enfin, la dernière réponse dans le poll, la quatrième. So the fourth question was the most answered one. I'm sorry, I must have.
It was the E, so it was the E in the list. So most people voted for the E.
No, because in the post I have, I'm sorry, I only got 4 answers for the question.
Mais ta réponse D, c'était la E là sur la liste.
Okay. So most people voted for E.
Okay, great. So that's really helpful in sort of structuring our conversation about what people feel comfortable doing. And, you know, for some people, the age of the child is really important. One of the things we'll talk about is trying to figure out what amount of information is the right information for your child at that particular point. That can track with age, but it also tracks with maturity level and how frequently you've been having these conversations in the past. So Claire's point about going from 0 to 60 is a solid one for parents who have not already had these conversations with their children. I was having a lot of these conversations with my child pretty early on. And so she probably would have been able to identify the Confederate flag and know about some of these things, but that is right in terms of you really want to sort of meet your child at the point that they are and start to layer in these conversations, right? Provide more detail over time. Some people I thought might have been tempted, at least maybe they didn't record it in the poll here, but they might have been tempted to choose one of the earlier options in the list. Tell her to never draw the flag again, and nobody really wants to talk about it. Maybe they don't think she's ready. So a lot of parents will avoid discussions of race with their children when they are in this age group, when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10, to preserve that sort of sphere of influence, that moment when the child is really not burdened with all of these really complex and heavy and just for some people, scary issues around race. We'll talk a little bit about why that's a bad idea, why it actually ends up making your child more susceptible to dangerous influences than if you had some of these open conversations. The second option of tell her it's a pretty flag, but there are lots of better flags to draw. Again, that's an avoidance strategy, and it's probably something that's chosen by people who think if we could just maintain this bubble of innocence for as long as possible, right, the child is better placed, is better situated. Better prepared to deal with challenges. Again, when you kick the can down the road, so to speak, when you keep putting off starting these conversations about race, you make it more and more difficult because then your child is at a maturity level where they want more details and they want more sustained engagement on these topics. And you may create a dynamic where they actually don't trust you. So if you wait until they're 10, 12, 15 to actually have meaningful conversations about race, and they turn to you and say, you didn't tell me all this stuff before. You've been letting me go around and not know this stuff. How could you not tell me this? Right? They actually feel like you've misrepresented the world to them, that you've kept them in the dark about important things. And so if you introduce these ideas earlier at an appropriate level of generality, and you have layered conversations where you add more information over time, then you're building that relationship of trust, that relationship of dialogue that allows your child to continue to come to you with questions about some of these challenging topics. And they really don't feel like you'll hide information from them or be a person that they don't trust. C was designed to sort of introduce a little bit of levity into this, which is to say, some parents just always try to push it off on the other parent. You know, there's like one parent that deals with this and they say, I don't want to talk about it, but you talk to your father about it later. You talk to your mother about it later. Really both parents need to, right, be willing to have these conversations. You don't want to communicate to your child that opting out is really a choice. The conversation about the Confederacy, the history of slavery in the United States, and the relationship that she has to it as a white person, right, is for a child that has some degree of sophistication about these issues. And I thought some people would react to that particular portion of it that says she has a great debt to pay back to Black people. Did anybody have a reaction to that portion?
Yes.
Okay. Is that Nancy?
Yes. Hi, Camille.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess when I read that, it begs more conversation to explain to the child, to a child, what their role is. And I think when you say you have a debt to pay, you kind of have to contextualize it. There's more that you kind of have to present. And that's where I find myself stumbling when I think about how to explain, and it's not like we can undo it. It's how do we help our children and our families take some level of responsibility to make things better? But paying the debt back, I'm not really sure what that means in real terms.
Okay, so thank you for that. It was meant to be provocative. It's meant to, I'm not going to answer all of your questions for you in this presentation. Some of this is homework. Some of this is for you to take back home and think that within your household, how would you characterize, right? For white families, for other families of color who aren't African American or from the African diaspora and have the same relationship to slavery, how do you describe your relationship to Black communities? And what would that debt mean? Does it mean an affirmative obligation to disrupt discrimination dynamics when you see them? Does it mean acknowledging a history? Does it mean not tolerating unfairness? What does it mean? A lot of people have this really sort of loaded reaction to, I don't have a debt, I didn't do anything wrong. That's kind of the wrong response. It's not really responsive to the challenge, right? The challenge is that the United States has a particular history. You weren't there at the time of history during Reconstruction, during the 1950s. You are here now, and there are opportunities for you now to chart a different path, to acknowledge that past and to make sure the contemporary conditions are different. Is that a way of responding to that quote unquote debt? And you don't have to describe it as a debt. It's just, what's your relationship to that history? That's what I'm
Everything you said resonates with me 100%. It wasn't until, to be honest, George Floyd happened that I had to bridge uncomfortable conversations with my closest friends who are Black, because I didn't just want to keep talking about it like everything is fine. I wanted to be somebody that they were willing to share the bad stuff with and feel comfortable to, but you have to earn that space. You don't just get to say, just tell me everything. So that's part of, in my opinion, paying back that debt. It's coming to with open ears and recognizing that there's a life that's lived right next to us that we don't even see because we never experience it. And that's disheartening to me. And I want my child to recognize that she has a role in making things right.
And that's a profound and powerful realization. Thank you for that. I think there's a certain part of your community that's in that place that wants the skills, wants the opportunities to think more about how do I become a more supportive ally, accomplice for people who are experiencing these kinds of patterns of discrimination and marginalization. Other people, and again, there's space for you in this conversation because we're working through all these things. Other people are at an earlier point where my description of that debt is like, it's like I just kind of opened it like I brushed against a scab for them, okay? Because that is a really sort of loaded issue in terms of how is this sort of drawing attention to racial identity a problem, you know, for some parents? Are we emphasizing things that are going to cause our children pain? There are parents of color who think, some of them think we shouldn't talk about race, and they want to preserve that space of innocence for their children as well. So one of the things that this particular scenario is designed to sort of introduce is, if you don't talk to your child about race from an early age, you can depend on it that someone else is. And you may not like who that someone else is. They will pick up things, we talked in our earlier session today about osmosis. When you don't talk to kids about things, they take all sorts of cues from your behavior that you may not mean to signal anything. So you may actually have a diverse set of friends, but you move to a community where all of your friends are white, and your kids are growing up in a community where all of your friends are white, and they take the meaning from that all of our friends are white. That's not what you meant to communicate. That's not actually who you are. That's the message you've delivered by not having conversations. Every time you turn on the television, every time they go on the internet, there are other people who are talking to them about race in ways subtle and direct. All of that information is being pulled together in this kind of Frankenstein picture for them about racial hierarchy and racial subordination. And one of the things that kids learn when we don't talk to them about race is that they're not supposed to talk about race. That doesn't mean they don't have racial meanings. That doesn't mean they don't develop racial frameworks. It means they don't talk about them, or they won't talk to their parents about them. So when you go to a school and you look across the schoolyard and you see these single race play groups and children of color pushed off to the side, those children have gotten messages about racial hierarchy from somewhere, often not from their parents. Often those messages are inconsistent with things that their parents believe and value. But they're acting out hierarchical patterns that they're picking up from osmosis through their parents' unwitting practices, from messages they're getting again from television, from advertisements, from the internet. So please know, even though you may not talk to your child about race, they are still developing racial understandings. And for parents of color, and I can't emphasize this point enough, your child may be experiencing discrimination and have no one to talk to about it, and have no language or no framework for making sense of what is happening to him or her. So although you may have made the political decision to commit to colorblindness, the world has not. The world has not. And so your child is negotiating a world where there are all sorts of racial meanings circulating, and he or she or they may be treated differently in different contexts, and they'll notice it, but they won't know how to make sense of it. And so the biggest gift you can give to them is a language and a framework for understanding that it's not just them and they're not alone, but there are other people sharing that experience. There are strategies they can use, there are places they can go to talk. And you're giving them a context in which they can remain close to their friends. So this is all a lot for one slide, but one of the things that happens when you have a community where different people are at different places on this issue, some talk about race early, others don't talk about race at all, is kids have very different perspectives on the world. And so they find it hard to talk to each other. If one of them is experiencing, people are following, let's say, him around in a store, and he pretty much knows it's because he's Black, and he's in a group of, let's say, the majority of his group is white, or let's say Asian. And no one else in that group has any conversations with their family about race. When he tries to talk to his friends, they don't know what he's talking about. They might doubt his claims. There'll be all sorts of what we call micro invalidations that happen that cause him to withdraw, that cause him to feel misunderstood, that cause him to shut down. So when you think you're creating this bubble of innocence for your child, right, you're creating all sorts of impediments for him or her or them to have meaningful relationships with other children. Any questions or thoughts about what I've talked about so far? You'll get additional information from the slide. There's ways in which talking about race actually makes you a little bit less intellectually sharp. So when you learn there are certain things you're not supposed to notice and not supposed to talk about, your brain does that with other things. Your brain starts to think other things are off limits, or it will skip over bits of information. It's not something you particularly want to encourage. And I will say myself, I haven't encountered that many brilliant racists, but you'd be the judge. Okay, onward. So let's say you're committed to doing the right thing and you want to try to have some of these conversations at least. Sometimes it gets complicated, and we'll keep making questions harder, right? Because I don't want to pretend that this is easy and intuitive. Sometimes it takes a little bit of reflection. Okay, so here we have Carlos. Carlos's mother is very committed to diversity and inclusion. She buys him a book. She buys a book for him about slavery and Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. Again, this is the sort of network of houses and stables and spaces. When slavery was still in operation, they had this framework they called the Underground Railroad that linked together all of these spaces, and people who were trying to escape slavery would live in these houses and stay in these stables and keep out of slave watchers' eye until they could get to the north and be free. Okay, so Harriet Tubman was a person who kept going back to the South and bringing former slaves up through the Underground Railroad to freedom. She also became a spy during the Civil War. So books about her are very cool. There's a couple of movies out in case you're interested. And Carlos's mother has read him this book and he loves it. And Carlos's mother is just pleased as punch that he has really, leaned into this and just is fully engaged. Carlos also has an African-American babysitter named Jamise, and she arrives one day to find him reading the book in the family's living room. And he says to her, "You're so lucky not to be a slave, Jamise. If slavery was still a thing, I would totally ask for you to be my slave because you're so pretty and so nice." And Jamise's mother looks at Carlos's mother, Jamise looks at Carlos's mother awkwardly. And he says, "I would never whip you or anything." Carlos's mother flushes, grabs him, and ushers him out of the room. Okay, what should Carlos's mother do? Okay, A, fire the babysitter. She should have intervened. This should be B. B, scold Carlos and tell him you never want him to hear him speak that way again. C, advise Carlos that he should not talk about diversity books with other people and inform the school that they should limit his work in this area. God forbid he did this at school, right? It would be incredibly embarrassing. D, hire a psychologist for Carlos as he has developed racial bias issues. Or E, discuss the matter with Carlos and talk about empathy, context, and getting permission when we talk to others about issues of difference. So what do we think? And you can just see Carlos. He's so proud of what he's learned. Sometimes when you give kids books, they want to talk about them. They want to go out and share what they've learned. And isn't this exactly the result that Carlos's mother would have wanted, for him to go out and share what he's learned? How are we doing, Stephanie? How many people have voted?
So it seems like 79% of people have voted, 70 people on 88.
Okay, so we'll give it maybe 10, 15 more seconds.
How about F? None of the above.
As far as that, I heard a voice, but with Zoom, I can't really see who's speaking at any sometimes. Who was that?
Françoise, I think.
Yes,
Why none of
right.
the,
Françoise.
sure, why none of the above?
I like the beginning of E, but not the end. And everything else, I don't like at all.
Okay, so what would your discussion with Carlos look like?
The beginning of E. Explain a bit of the context, not too much, but the getting permission? No. Why should you get permission to discuss anything? It doesn't make sense.
Great. So this is an important conversation. Does that make sense to say to him, you should get permission before you talk to someone about their difference?
No.
I think it's actually, I'm sorry, my name's Ian. I'm one of the kindergartners' father. I think it's very important to ask permission about topics like this, because there could be some very deep scars on people, and that maybe frankly just doesn't want to talk to you about it. And that this could be something that could really relive some old trauma. And so I think it's really appropriate to try to educate our kids on what suffering is and like why this is such a big deal. And I think in that context, maybe we could reframe the conversation to say, instead of you be my slave, said, I would always fight for you to make sure that you're okay, because such a kind and beautiful person.
Okay, so Carlos, right, loves his babysitter, thinks she's beautiful. He's coming from sort of a positive place. The way it comes out, right, is the unfortunate thing. And we've seen that happen with kids before, is that they have a good thought, they have a good feeling about something, but it kind of comes out in a jumbled way, or in a way where you're, I call them the clutch the pearls moments, where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe he actually, right, got that from what I gave him. So thank you for that, Ian. And Francois, so I do want to give more people an opportunity to reflect on this getting permission, because I think Ian has touched on an important point about, are we demonstrating empathy towards people in our community who represent particular issues of difference? And what does it mean to treat them with respect, and for our children to treat them with respect?
Hi, this is Erica. I just wanted to say, for I read a bit of the sentence completely differently to Ian. I think he makes an absolutely important point, and you should get permission from someone else. I read it as permission from your mum. So that's where it threw me a little bit, because that seems weird. But permission from the person that you want to discuss differences with, absolutely. And Ian put it perfectly.
Okay, this is great. So again, sometimes ambiguities in questions really open up productive opportunities for conversation. So again, we heard that no, you shouldn't ask permission. I'm gonna ask you to sit with and reflect with that a little bit, is what that means for the folks of color in your community, or who represent different aspects of difference. If they feel like in every interaction, someone can come up to them and instantly start talking about whatever is of interest to them about their particular difference, that's very, very hard. That's very tough. It can produce all sorts of trauma. This particularly awkward situation should kind of illustrate that, is that there is this issue of permission, right, that needs, and who does that permission come from? From Carlos's mother or from Jamies? Okay, if you're going to Jamies, if he trots up to Jamies and says, can I talk to you about slavery? Does that create a condition where she feels equal and respected, or does that shift a kind of burden to her?
Could I say something?
Sure.
I just feel like there's one element that wasn't introduced as an option in the multiple choice, which is how I would hope that Carlos's mother would have presented him the book with a little bit more context and information from the top. So I think regardless of Carlos's age, I mean, the photo looks like he's 7, but regardless of his age, to hand a child a book on the Underground Railroad all about slavery and Harriet Tubman with no preamble of what this is, what slavery, anything, to give him that kind of excitement and encouragement to talk with his nanny about it, it seems like an unexplored opportunity that the mom missed. That knowledge is power, and that's wonderful, but I also feel like she could have been along the way, like as he's reading the chapters, they could talk about it. It's just such a lost opportunity that the mom missed. so that maybe she could say, hey, we're reading this book to the nanny as he's reading it as well. I don't know what's going to come out of this, and just kind of be, and try to just kind of not keep the nanny in the dark about what she's including in her son's education, and just more communication overall. Because I'm sure the nanny, like what you said too, in regards to, a person of color is probably getting hit with lots of unrequested questions, especially this year on the heels, but even before. I mean, there's always been police brutality. There's always been elements that have been built up to everything we're experiencing every year. It's never gone away. So I think that to give context to Carlos, so he's not just like stepping in quicksand and walking through millions of landmines without even knowing that, because he's just a kid.
Okay, so more context for him. It's funny, Claire, as you were discussing this, I remember when my mom, I was about Carlos's age, gave me a book that told me about the birds and the bees. It was age appropriate, it was kind of abstract. I promptly, I read the book and went out and taught my grandmother about the birds and the bees. Got it all wrong, didn't understand the parts. So, I have some empathy for Carlos's mom, is that sometimes you think my mom did discuss the book with me. I believe she said something about this isn't information we talk about with everybody. So I was like, oh, okay, we talk about it with grandma. She's not anybody. So I do think, of course, right, that would be fantastic for parents to have these conversations about these books with their kids, give them a sounding board, maybe work through the bulk of it. So, but there's always the unexpected, right? With kids, you got to expect the unexpected. So even though, maybe Carlos's mother should have said a little bit more, do we think that in the future he should ask her before he goes and talks to a Black person about slavery, or is the permission given by every Black person he encounters?
Maybe it's the way I've read the multiple choice in the last two questions, but I kind of feel like both times it's almost minimized these things to be things that happened in the past. And I think that's like a trap that we don't want to fall into as parents. I don't want to minimize what's happening now as such. With the Confederate flag, to say that that happened in the past is kind of minimizing the fact that clearly it's happening right now. And with this answer as well, I don't want to say that, okay, the Underground Railroad happened and that's the end of slavery. You know what I mean? I think that it's a really fine line in these answers on how far to take it into the present.
Okay, that's a great and valid point. I do think the first example said this is something, these were conditions of inequality, it's what's represented by the flag, and we never want that to happen again. So it was a little bit of a taste of what's happening now. It may have been, really quick and not fast enough, but that is definitely, something you want to consider. How you talk about slavery's implications or repercussions in the present. You can certainly talk about that, but I don't want to lose the thread on this issue about permission, because I think it is a critical one for folks of color to feel safe in your community, or talking to if you're going to have these diversity conversations with your child, if you're going to read these books. A lot of them, they're great books, and they're finding ways to introduce these ideas earlier and earlier. So you are going to have relatively young kids that want to share information.
But then again, kids don't really have much of a sense of history. And I would like most of the discussions, I agree with the last person who spoke, to start from events. I liked your example with the guy who's on the television watching Floyd or whatever. No, it was the Capitol. But starting with things that are happening now. I mean, the link between the Confederate flag and racism is definitely not going to be obvious to a kid this young. And same thing here. They don't have a sense of history. When I came home from my first history class, where I learned about the Gaulois and the Romains, and I was raised right after Second World War and heard a lot about before and after the war. I came home and asked my parents whether they were Gaulois, Gauls, or Romains, Romans, before the war. And to me, that this comment sort of, I'm afraid to say, invalidates the polls and to a certain extent, because they make the assumption that a kid has a sense of history, which in my long experience with children and grandchildren, they don't.
I just think that's our job. I understand. I think that comes into play and fills in as they get older. But our job is to bridge that gap a little bit as they get older. So I hear you, Francoise. I just think that our job is to break that down now so that they can be respectful now. I don't think they need to have the whole picture the same way they don't have the whole pictures about nutrition or math, or there's a lot of things they don't have the whole picture about. I think we're teaching respect. We would tell our children the same thing. If they were to just walk up to someone of Jewish origin and just start talking about Holocaust, we would speak to them about the sensitivity and the respect, the same way we say you just can't touch anyone and hug anyone. So I see it as a building thing, something that we build with our children over time. When I read this, I think, of course, our kids are going to say things that we have to adjust and parent and guide. I don't see that as, it's obviously uncomfortable. It's a clutch the pearls moment, but we have the long goal, right? Like we have the long view of 18 years and what we can do in that time. So I think as much as you're saying, Francoise, that they don't understand the history in this moment, I don't think that's necessary to teach them respect. I think we can give them some guardrails and those pieces fill in.
Thank you for that, Nicole. That's right, very helpful, the idea of some guardrails. As you introduce this information to your children, as you give them books, as you talk to them about particular historical events, that is how you're building the understanding of history. That is how the information gets to them. Along the way, in giving them that full picture of history, there will be moments where they say things that may sound racist to you, that may sound troubling to you. Children often are not that good at articulating their thoughts. And so one thing that you need to do is kind of get over that traumatic moment where the thing comes out of your child's mouth after you've given them information that you're like, oh my God, that's not, that's not what I intended for you to take away from that. And continue to have the conversation so that they end up with the interpretation and the ability to talk about it in a way that is not concerning. But know that you're going to have a couple of shots at this. You want to keep the conversations going in your home. And you do want, and again, people will do what's right for them. But if you're trying to be respectful of other people of color in your community, you do want Carlos to ask mommy, is this an appropriate time to bring this up? Do we have a relationship of intimacy and trust with this particular person that I can talk about these issues? And if you've taught him about empathy, again, he's going to come from the place of, yes, I would fight against slavery because you're so great, Jamies, as opposed to thinking a proper way of expressing love and intimacy is to want someone to be your slave.
Can I take that just one, can I say one more sentence further?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, being someone white in America, even though generationally back, I have some history in other countries, it obviously gets diluted and it just becomes whiteness. I also want my children to see that we make mistakes and we own them. Not the end of the world, not a definition on us. We can say, I'm sorry, I did that wrong without shame and all these things that make it really hard to just own it, to separate. I mean, shame is so toxic, to separate, I did that wrong or I said that wrong and that was hurtful, as opposed to I am bad, because you can't actually own, like, I'm sorry, I didn't do that well. If everyone's freaked out about like, oh, we're horrible people or you made us look bad. And so I think that there's a modeling that comes if you can say like, you know what, when we do something that's hurtful, we just own it and we do repair. And I know that we're speaking specifically in this zone, but I think it's a broader goal of being able to apologize for not knowing, because I know I don't do it perfectly and I'm not going to, and I can't possibly at this moment teach my kids all there is to know about it. And even though I'm trying, I want to give them the language for saying like, I didn't do that well, I'm really sorry.
That's probably one of the most important things you can teach your child, particularly in this area, but you're right, it does pertain to other things. I can't tell you the number of adults who I encounter in racially awkward situations who find it extraordinarily difficult to apologize. Instead, they will point me to the community service work they're doing in Guam, or tell me that they went to a Black Lives Matter protest, or show me the book that they're reading about X, Y, or Z, or tell me that they're dating or married to someone who's a person of color. All of that instead of just saying, whoops, I got that one pretty wrong, that didn't come out right, or maybe that wasn't me in my best moment. I do try to model that behavior for my daughter. Occasionally I will just get things wrong. Sometimes I stumble over my pronouns when I do the he, she, they. It's become easier over time. I make a mistake sometimes about gender attribution. I'll assume something when I shouldn't. So I try to model for her the ways in which I struggle with particular things, and also to be generous and supportive of people who acknowledge mistakes. Because one of the things that you learn as a person of color, sort of negotiating this space and negotiating this work, is the people who can apologize are the people you can trust. You can trust people who are willing to acknowledge their errors and take responsibility for them and move on and try to do better. You cannot trust people who are defensive and shut down and deny that things have happened. Unfortunately, they're the people who will do the most violence to you. Because their self-concept, again, I'm an identity formation scholar, their identity is so invested in being progressive that they will do all sorts of things and make all sorts of maneuvers in order to protect their own self-concept as a progressive person, that often people of color will get squashed in the process. So people who apologize, I love them. I surround myself with them. People who are defensive and very invested in showing me how progressive they are, I'm just a little nervous, because we never know how that's going to play out. So thank you for that.
This is right. You brought up a point, and I feel like we kind of skated over it, and I would actually like to go a little bit more into depth about it, which was the part about asking for permission and whether that puts the onus on the person of color to then educate. And then I guess that is really sort of based on the relationship that you have with that person. And of course, this is more, this is something that the parent would be able to have a better understanding of than the child. I don't know. The child can ask for permission, but I don't know that they would, at such a young age, understand the nature of the relationship. My children tend to think that everybody is their deepest best friend. But I would like a little bit more discussion on that point, because I find that a really interesting discussion about, how, do you really want to put the onus on the person of color to then have to explain it?
Yeah, so I'm, again, trying to create enough space where I'm not telling people exactly how to raise their children. I'm giving you information about what's going to create conditions of respect and fairness and a real sense of community for the other folks in communities. If you decide to tell your child, come to mommy, before you start talking to a person who we don't have an established relationship in this community, come to mommy or come to daddy, right? And talk to me about this, because it may be an imposition for you to discuss this topic with them. If it's someone that you already have a relationship of intimacy and respect with, that's going to be a space where even the chances are that Jameis she's looking at Carlos's mother awkwardly, but she hasn't grabbed her stuff and left and quit. Okay, and one of the reasons she hasn't is because she loves Carlos and she knows Carlos is getting it wrong, but she wants help, right? She doesn't want to be in this situation constantly. She wants Carlos's mother to do more to sort of prevent that from happening. There are going to be relationships that you have with people of color where maybe they will be open to some conversation on this issue if it's part of a natural one and a larger conversation, not just mining them for like interesting insights about culture or difference, or sort of unburdening yourself about the political issue of the moment. It's not that, it's more of a continued dialogue and exchange where they can come to you and talk as well, right? Then that's different. But I think as a default, for those folks who you don't have that relationship with, that child should definitely be coming to mom and saying, is this a moment where this is an appropriate topic to talk about? Is it okay for me to talk about it with this person? And you can say to them, this is not an appropriate thing. You might even have a conversation with that person and say, Carlos just read a book about Harriet Tubman. He's obsessed. He might bring it up, right? If the conversation gets awkward, definitely signal to me and I'll come over and rescue you from this awkward interaction, or, you know, I can participate and make sure that this sort of stays, again, the guardrails. Okay. So I hope that's helpful.
Very, thank you.
You know, we also have to talk about the economic factor. So if you're going to Jamie's for permission, and Jamie's is dependent upon this job for her livelihood, she may put up with various kinds of abuse simply because she doesn't have a lot of economic options. So that's the other danger of sort of outsourcing the permission to her, but to other people who are in economically vulnerable situations.
Yeah, I totally get that from that story. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. So I think we have one more scenario. You guys are a great group though. You get to all the hard stuff. This is great. I don't have to sort of like pull teeth to get a conversation. Okay, so this is another one that tends to come up a lot. Okay, meet Julian and Jennifer. For some of you who came to the prior parent ed situation, you'll remember Julian. He was our vegan cupcake thief. But anyway, Julian is reformed. And actually, he didn't steal the cupcake last time. Some of you are laughing because you remember. So meet Julian and Jennifer. They're classmates in the same second grade class. One day, Julian is on the playground with Jennifer and says, "Your skin is dirty. You should wash that off. You look like poop." Jennifer bursts into tears. Julian's teacher wants to hold him accountable for the comment, but his parents think that age 6, Julian is just too young to understand the consequences of his comment. They fear he will be traumatized for just innocently expressing his opinion. Also, Julian was not born in the United States and he's only lived here for 3 years, and they do not think he is racist or even aware of the stereotypes against African Americans. When Julian's mother hears that he was called into the principal's office, she is extremely angry. She is even more angry when she hears that he began to cry when he admitted making the statement. "He's just a little boy," she exclaims. If the school wants to follow up and discipline Julian, what should Julian's parents do? And isn't Jennifer cute? She's so happy. Can you imagine her breaking down crying after someone said that to her in the schoolyard? I asked my daughter about this before I came to the presentation. She's seen this happen at least 3 times. Okay, it is very common, very common. What should Julian's parents do? A, if the school insists on discipline, withdraw Julian from the school. He will not ever appreciate diversity if he is afraid of sanctions. Okay. B, advise the administration that he will be disciplined at home. This is a private matter. Don't dwell on it when you talk to him about it, but tell him you never want to hear him say these words again. C, tell the school you must be allowed to collaborate on whatever the sanction is going to be. It is your job to protect Julian against sanctions that are too harsh. D, allow the school to explain its disciplinary approach and tailor it to the situation consistent with established rules. A consistent approach to these issues is critical for creating a trusting environment for all students. So Stephanie, is there a way for us to see as the votes are coming in, if I can see them as they're recorded, or can I just see it at the end?
I think you only can see it when I share it. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
We have 42% of vote.
Okay, great.
It's moving fast. People are reactive.
Now, I expected that some people might sort of guess what they think the right answer is supposed to be, but they might not want to choose it. And if you don't want to choose it, don't choose it. I mean, this exercise is not helpful if you just say what you think you're supposed to say. Choose the option that represents how you really feel. Okay, Stephanie, maybe when we get to about like 75, 80%, we'll go on, just because there's still a bit to cover.
People are hesitant to answer, only 68. We're almost there.
Okay. I promise you that there's some fun stuff at the end that doesn't require the answering of hard questions. This might be the last hard question to answer.
Okay, it seems like the numbers are pretty stable. We're at 73%. So should I end it?
Yes, let's just go for it.
Here we go.
I do think so. My colleague, Carol Ross Burnett is here, and she talks a lot with me about what silences mean when people don't vote, when they don't speak. So if she comes back to talk to you at a certain point, she may talk to you about what silence means. Silence is a form of communication. Silence speaks sometimes even more loudly than words. So if you didn't vote, you're still communicating something, okay? But I do like it when people vote because it requires you to commit, and the ability to commit to sort of a particular perspective gives you some leverage if you feel like you're uncomfortable with the choice you made. Okay, so
I actually think it was a little confusing in that there was a typo in the actual poll. So I had a hard time understanding D, but so that might have been part of it.
Oh, in the poll or in the, well,
Yeah,
in the poll, it's now clear when it's on the screen, but it was a little confusing in the poll.
okay.
To
Okay,
me.
do you understand it now, or do you think?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so 83% went with option D. Allow the school to explain its disciplinary approach and tailor it to the situation consistent with established rule. A consistent approach to these issues is critical for creating a trusting environment for all students. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that nice? I just wonder if people are really going to have that reaction when it's your little Julian. A significant number of people would want to collaborate to make sure that the sanction wasn't going to be too harsh. Okay, so what are the dangers in the collaboration? Parents who require collaboration to tailor fit the discipline to their child.
For me, it just comes back to the shame. I think that was my concern between the C or D. I feel like schools in general are pretty good, but I think most of us have been raised with that as a tool. And so I'm a little leery about that. I see my kids shut off if they just feel shame. So that's why I want to go with D, because I feel like it's the most responsive to the little girl who deserves to be treated with all the humanity that every human deserves. But when I saw it, I felt like if I'm going to be honest, I have to do C, because I want it to be instructive and clear and not move into some of the options have been before that you've put up have been more shaming, like how dare you? And I just think a kid doesn't know what to do with that at all. It's not instructive. So that's why I went with C, even though I can tell that that's not very popular.
So it's always okay to choose that's how we build a discussion. So thank you for choosing it. Karen, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. I wanted to say something, which was that I was actually, and I think it's such a sad thing, you know, as I was reading and hearing these possible responses, I was like, wouldn't it be great if D were always the case? So it wasn't like something that even occurred to me that there would be such guidelines in place, that an environment would be so safe, because I think it is so often the kind of thing we don't talk about explicitly. And so, you know, it's funny because as you were going down, I was like, oh, okay, so C, you know, I have questions, but there's a collaboration, there's an open conversation. That I was like, but D, oh my God, what if going into every environment, people had a real sense of these are the guidelines for respect, and this is how we respect each other, and this is what we expect. And, you know, obviously then if we have a problem, there's going to be a response, but that's something we've already thought about, as opposed to sort of after the fact having to kind of do this rapid fix thing. There was something like D felt really liberating to me, you know, because of course, if you have such specific guidelines around what respect means in a given environment, it becomes a very different conversation. You know, you're really putting it in a framework of like, that there's not going to be this wiggle room, that, you know, there's not going to be a punishment that's too harsh,
because we've really talked about this in front of the issue, and we have this understanding as adults, as kids. Like, I don't know, I can't, I'm trying to describe it, but just like Dee felt really nice. I was like, that would be nice to always feel like in an environment like this, that there was this common ground expectation. And yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem real, you know, based on lived experience. I don't think it's the way we're set up in general in this country, and, you know, in every country in different ways, but wouldn't that be nice, you know?
Can I say something, please? I'm Xavier.
Sure, and then we should probably go to Charlie. I think he's had his electronic hand up too.
Oh, okay.
Well, go ahead.
Who's first?
You are.
Oh, okay. It's funny because listening to people, it already seems that Julian is a victim. So I think it's interesting for me because I don't think he's already a victim. And indeed, my question is, what is the approach of the school facing such an event? Because from my experience, I see that the school is not really prepared.
I think that's exactly right. That's your homework as a community. That's your homework as a community. I know I would feel a lot more confident sending my little Jennifer to school in a space that had some guidelines. When schools have these kind of, horatory, like, we should do this, and this is the way things should be, and there are never any consequences, children ignore them. And they test limits, and then it creates chaos because schools don't really know what to do. And there's all sorts of political issues, sometimes with regard to who's making donations to the school and who's got comes from a nice family, and who, right, all sorts of things that start factoring in when you don't have sort of clear disciplinary approaches. You can give clear notice to people about what the standards are for your community before they even enroll, so no one is surprised. And it doesn't prevent collaboration in the sense that you have the ability to contextualize whatever the school's disciplinary response is for your child. So the sort of private matter layer of it can still be addressed, but having a consistent approach at the school can be very reassuring for families. And in a second, we'll get to the benefits for little Julian, right, who's facing the sanction. Charlie, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think that this is when dealing with our children, this is like the ultimate test of privilege and how we exercise privilege, because we all want the best for our own children. Of course, we're going to be fiercely looking out for our own children, but let's just kind of focus on how the parents should be feeling empathy for little Jennifer, and focused on the real victim here, right, was Jennifer. And so this anger about Julian being disciplined, to me is just representative of a lack of context, empathy, and kind of an exercise of privilege. So which I do think with our own children, that's one of the biggest tests of that, because again, we all are fierce defenders of our own children.
Absolutely. So that really captures it well, the sort of relationship. Like, when else are you going to exercise your privilege if not to protect your children, right? If you're thinking they might be traumatized, it'll take a lot to sort of control your instinct to intervene in this matter. Learning to see this disciplinary experience is actually a productive thing for him is an important part of it too. I think that changes the framework. I think Umberto has his hand up, or Raquel, I'm sorry.
Yes, it's Umberto.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And then it's going to be Raquel. My squares are sort of shifting around because of Zoom. But you can go ahead.
Well, good evening, everyone. Can you turn your example on, please? Okay. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hello? 1 second. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. You can turn this important. What I wanted to say was that I had picked B, but I actually considered to pick D as well. And the reason why, because it's like when you first said that the child, he's 6 years old, they've been in the country for 3 years, they're from another country. And so that had me thinking when I was sitting over here, I was like, wow. And he was coming from another country. And sometimes when you come from another country, a lot of these children, they never really interacted with Black children before, children of color. And so a lot of that, and especially in other countries, the racism is just very, very, it's just out there, you know? And so now that he's in the United States, I'm not saying that there's racism in the United States, and it's not as like, you know, broad as it is over here, but with these children, they're young, and, you know, children, they don't know no better, and racism is taught. So you can't really blame the kid for that, you know, because at the end of the day, it just falls back on the parents, because the parents got to teach them the right way, you know, and right from wrong. And so I don't really think, like I said, you know, with the child, like they said, they only been here for 3 years. So it's also, it has to be taught by the parents, you know, on being respectful and, you know, telling kids what's right or wrong, what's not, what's, you know, it's shameful to do that to another person and things like that. That's basically all I really had to say.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And is Raquel, did you have thoughts that you wanted to share?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to bring it back to what you said before about just having like that teaching moment with your child, and something like that happens. I thought it was absurd that parents were more upset about his discipline than what he actually did. And I just thought that it was when we talk about community in the school, it's about caring about your child, but caring about the children your child attends school with, right? So I think it would be very important, like you said before, like when something like this happens, to teach your child empathy, to say, I'm sorry. You know, start with, I'm sorry. Because Jennifer, the little girl, is the one that is the victim. So you know, if you're not acknowledging if you're not acknowledging, you know, I feel like we're even leaving out that she is African American and you are white, and these are the differences. Like really like explaining the differences and why you should not be treating people in unequal, you know. So I just feel like this is a teaching moment. When something like this happens, I think you should bring the parents together, have a conversation, have a dialogue, you know, have your children watch the parents, you know, talk this matter out in a very friendly manner and see how it could be resolved. And then they'll learn from the way the parents react to this, of how they handle the situation. And children, you know, like you said, children learn things from the playground, but if they see their parents actually making an example, you know, showing by example, they will learn this lesson and hopefully never do it again.
So that would be the ideal scenario, is if you could have that kind of meaningful exchange, that you could depend upon the parents in the home to actually communicate the messages in that way. One thing the consistent disciplinary approach achieves is a kind of baseline and clear messaging about this kind of speech and this kind of conduct. So we would love it if both sets of parents come in and have that meaningful conversation.
Yeah, the problem is one set of parents always feel, you know, they feel like, oh, I am not racist. I am not, and no one's saying that. It's like there's a huge issue and this child was victimized, and it can make all the difference if there's an apology and a system where this doesn't happen again. You're literally scarring this child for life, and everybody's worried about the punishment.
And one thing I think is that perhaps this discussion is slanted in a little bit towards people who would be inclined to be more comfortable with the discipline. So some of the parents who might have more of the sort of defensive reactions around Julian, they're not here tonight. They're not participating in this conversation. Part of your homework as a community is to have that dialogue with them about how important this is understanding the impacts for Jennifer. So the slide I have up now, right, is trying to get, for people who are a little bit resistant to imagine the experience of Jennifer over time in a school environment where this isn't taken seriously. Okay, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So I've worked in schools where there are no disciplinary rules. A Black student will hear "you're dirty, you're ugly" constantly from different children. And by the time they get to high school, they're so traumatized that they're completely locked down and depressed. And then people wonder why there are differences in academic performance or different levels of participation or differences in affect. Some children skip through the schoolyard. Some children walk with their heads hung low. And if you could not anticipate who is going to tell you you looked dirty or ugly at any time, in any moment, in your moments of triumph or in your moments of vulnerability, what would your life be like? What would your life be like? Johan?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, for me as a Black person, it's so hard, you know, I'm trying to be empathetic or think about Julian's parents, but I can't even wrap my brain to even shift my mind to think like, what must it be like for his parents? Because just like you said, like the rage I almost immediately feel from the standpoint of your child may not want to go to school and trying to explain to your child, you know, that you are beautiful. Like I said, it's like I said, I understand that those things are going to happen. They're unfortunately unavoidable. But it's just like, for me as a Black person, trying to prepare my child for the day when someone says that, and, you know, already telling her that her hair is beautiful, that her skin is beautiful, because knowing that at some point someone's going to say exactly those comments that you put, and for her to be prepared and at least have had the dialogue and the conversation that's going to counteract what someone might say to her because of what she looks like or the way that she talks or her hair. So like just trying to, like I said, it's hard not to be emotional when you see those words, because those exact same things, like you mentioned, like the playground. I grew up in the South, so I definitely wasn't a kid skipping through the playground and always was prepared for someone to make fun of my hair or my skin, because like you said, it just happened on the playground. And the time I was raised, there was no teacher was going to come to your aid. You just had to deal with it and handle it on your own. So like I said, I think, I can't remember the person who spoke, but you do want to see an environment, a place where there are consistent consequences, and like not even consequences, but at least a dialogue when those things happen, so the children have some perception of, you know, this little girl is going to remember that. It's an apology, or like I said, it's going to take time for her to feel trust and safe in that space again.
Okay?
So that's all I want to add. Like I said, as a Black person who, you know, has been told that, just to understand that those things, even if there's an apology or the kids become friends, you're going to, that child's going to be shut down for a period of time and be traumatized, and is not going to simply forget what Julian said to her, even if he didn't understand what it meant.
That's so important too. So thank you for bringing up that point about intent. And I want to encourage everyone who's not speaking to have mute on, because these are really fraught topics and people are sharing really emotionally powerful things. So if you are not speaking, please make sure you have your mute on. But the issue of intention, it's a lot of people get caught up on whether or not Julian intended to use kind of language associated with racial hierarchy, or whether he meant to be quote unquote racist. It doesn't matter for poor little Jennifer. Right? It's received the exact same way. And so that's where our attention needs to be. And if we can sort of establish the discipline in a way so that it says to the parents, we're not saying that you're bandying these words about in your home. We understand, right? We just talked about osmosis and the way our kids are sort of picking up things that are not what we intend to communicate to them. And to some extent, right, Julian is trying out a language of power. You can expect more of this right now because of the terrifying things that are going on across the country. Is your kid is going to bump into all sorts of things that you don't agree with. And they may end up saying things right now where they need to sort of be drawn up really quick and told that that's not acceptable, because there are all sorts of people that want to make them think that that's a language of power. And when they see the emotional impact on another person, right, they see that it still has power. It's a horrible power. It still exists. You don't want them to feel like it's a power that's not going to be met and challenged. And that's where having teachers, administrators, a school that is responsive to those complaints that when they come in, that don't say, oh, did you really hear that? Are you sure that that happened to you? Trust me, if a child comes to you and says, I've been called the N-word, it's not a pleasurable experience for him or her. They're going to be sure that that's what they heard and felt. Okay. If they're reporting, it takes a certain amount of confidence to sort of get to the point where you were reporting. People look at the teenager in this scenario, that Covington High School student who was sort of jeering and laughing at the Native American elder who tried to have an exchange with him. And they look at the sneer on his face and they wonder, how did my child end up at that point? Right? And that's a child who's experimented with this form of racial hierarchy and this power unsanctioned. He doesn't just end up there, right, on his own. He moves through an environment where there are no consequences for these little things. Oh, are you sure you heard that? Oh, well, he didn't mean it. Oh, well, he doesn't really know what it means to tell someone they look dirty. He learns what it means when he receives the discipline. He learns what it means when he has the clear conversation about why this is wrong. It feels terrible when he's 6. It will have seismic consequences when he's 15 and someone reports him for this and he's applying to a school. The consequences for him at 6 are far less than they will be when he's 17 and 18 and is on social media carrying a Confederate flag. So if you're worried about your child getting the sanction because they're so young and so innocent and you don't want to harm them, trust me, they want the message early. They want it clearly, right? You should deliver it then. They will thank you later. Any concerns about he's too young to really know what this means and he's too young to get the guide rails? You are doing your child a favor by making sure they understand the rules of the road now. Do not wait. Dupart and then Jessica.
Yeah, this was just a while back. We did not answer, and it's because and you were right. We were communicating something. We were having difficulty answering. We were torn between C and D, and just to piggyback off of what Raquel said, ideally, yes, it would be a collaboration, ending in consistency, and that's about all we have. Thanks.
And again, I don't want to shut down your desire to collaborate with the school. I want the collaboration to be around these consistent standards. I want the collaboration to be around building what that disciplinary regime is in the first place, not just in the moment, relief for my child is special, my child needs this. It's viewing yourselves as a community that's committed to certain norms. It's viewing yourselves as a community that is willing to extend certain protections to ensure that everyone can move through the space with confidence and reassurance. I really implore you, if the folks from this session go out and talk to 1 or 2 or 3 other parents who just decided not to come, they were too busy, time didn't work out for them, there's potentially a threat to our democracy. There are all sorts of reasons why people might have said they couldn't attend tonight. If you go out and talk to 2 or 3 people about what you've learned here tonight, about some of the insights that you've gained, you can transform your community. You really can transform your community. Jessica?
Hi.
Hi.
I guess, with this discussion, I'm just thinking about what is the disciplinary regime and what is a disciplinary norm. The issue of consequences is so important, and yet it's so ambiguous. And it seems like what the response to this moment could have lasting implications. And even within our own school, I think I ask myself, what would be the school's response to this? I don't know that we as a community have come up with an answer to a scenario like this that we're all aware of. Like how would Leela respond to something like this? Is it a kind of peace and reconciliation scenario? you know, what approach does the school take, and how do we as parents have input in that, I guess, is something that I just kind of wanted to open up.
I think you could have a whole session on that, and it would be an incredibly productive one, because it'll really dig deep into a lot of the norms that you want to promote in your community and what you think appropriate sanctions are and what's age appropriate. The school is, of course, going to retain experts to provide additional guidance on what that might look like, but that is a larger dialogue that I definitely, you know, encourage you to have and to really think about. I realize Stephanie's very strict with me, and she's going to tell me I have 6 minutes left. So I wanted to leave you, I'm just teasing you, Stephanie, I know you're not mean to me at all. I wanted to leave you with a little bit of information rather than, because I think some of this can be, you know, sort of, oh my gosh, there are, you know, so many challenges. How do I negotiate these waters? So just some general guidelines for talking to your kids about race. Go early, okay, at a level of abstraction, perhaps, so that it doesn't become too emotionally fraught for them. But early sort of, oh, why are all the, you know, homeless people Black? Well, they're not all Black, but there are certain economic things that happened that have put people in a different position relative to one another economically. And so we'll talk more about those as you grow up and like individually, but it's not that all of the homeless people are Black just because homeless people are Black. There's reasons, there's historical reasons that this happened. We can totally talk about them. It's going to take time. I can't explain them all to you as we're getting in the car to go to the supermarket. Okay. So that's the kind of thing that you open the door, you say, we're going to talk about it. We'll find a space and time. And then you start looking for materials to talk to your kids about homelessness. So early, often, layered, with different levels of specificity. You pay attention to how they're absorbing the information. You always check in to see where your child is and how they're doing with the information. Okay, there's lots of great books out there that you can read, and I can send you some references after this that you can get some more guidance. Tailor the discussions to the needs of your child, and have multiple conversations about the same subject. Sometimes your kid will be like, my daughter's at an age where she's like, ma, yeah, right, sure. And it doesn't seem like she's listening. And then 3 days later, she'll come back and she's totally listened and she has questions. So just because your child sort of pushes you off, it doesn't mean they're not listening, and it doesn't mean that they don't want the information. Sometimes there's just this kind of thing that kids do where they sort of communicate disinterest when actually, right, they are happy that the door is open. Remember that they will be processing in between. So you can go slow and give them time to process and see if they come back. But the most important thing is to create that open door atmosphere. And then I think Karen mentioned this earlier, solve problems together, be honest about your mistakes, show that you're wrestling with particular things. And it will encourage your child to be comfortable with wrestling as well. Okay. Last thoughts, there are great books, not just sort of instructional books, but if you're worried about your child walking up to another child and they haven't been in this country that long and they don't know how to describe skin color, get out ahead of the problem. Okay, read them some great books that give them language to talk about differences in skin color. There's a great book called The Skin You're In. And it talks about cinnamon colored skin and honey colored skin and sunset colored skin and how all of these shades of skin are beautiful. Really wonderful language around different shades of brown. If you think this is going to be a problem, if you think your child doesn't have the language to negotiate this space, then, right, get out ahead of it. Eyes that kiss at the corners, that's an opportunity to talk about quote unquote, right, Asian eyes, or eyes that are maybe a little bit thinner or have different points at the end than your child's eyes have. Again, really great language, beautiful poetic language to describe people who don't look like you. Help your child rather than just responding to an issue that produces conflict. Okay, other things you can think about when building your diversity bookshelf. Do you have books that recognize people of color as sources of expertise? Not every book should be about slavery or the civil rights movement or struggle or pain and other people coming in, white folks coming in to rescue Black and brown people. You want some books, right, that show people of color solving their own problems and as sources of expertise and inspiration for the world. That will condition them to see people of color as leaders. That's something that you want. Okay, books that disrupt multiple stereotypes at the same time. So Julian as a Mermaid is a great book because it's about a Latinx community that's also Black. So there are people of all different shades of brown, so it disrupts stereotypes about what it means to be Latinx. Some people have said the book is about a transgender child. It's a child who's gender fluid. in his presentation, okay? So he sort of tears down the drapes and makes himself a little mermaid outfit. His grandmother is overjoyed. Okay, that's also disrupting stereotypes around age. So some people assume older people have conservative views about gender fluidity, or even older Latinx people have, you know, stereotype views about masculinity and femininity. Julian's mother is there for all of it. She loves it. Okay, so a great book busting multiple stereotypes at the same time. Okay, and then does this book allow us to explore a plot featuring a character of color without the specter of racism or some other form of subordination? So maybe something beautiful, right? This little girl is just painting her neighborhood with color. There are no problems. She's building communities. She's joyful. It's a wonderful, beautiful book. As is One Day in the Eucalyptus Tree, where a little boy outsmarts a snake who is eating him. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation so tonight. I feel good because I ended at 8:29, so right within the zone of our time. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it provoked some thought for you. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone's question. I realize I see a couple of raised hands that I missed. If people who have questions want to hang around for a couple of minutes afterwards, I'm happy to answer those. But for the rest of you, thank you so much for coming. I hope you share what you've learned. And I look forward to our next time together.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille. I'm conscious of time. Yet again, another extremely stimulating and relevant presentation for our community, for which we're very grateful. Thank you to all the great questions and interactions from our parents. Thank you to faculty and staff for joining. And let's close the meeting there. Obviously, the dialogue will continue and the dialogues will continue. And thank you for your willingness so much, Camille. You know, we're still in the early days of this work, but our commitment as a school and the commitment of the board in setting up a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Very grateful to everyone who participates on that. We're coming at this from multiple prongs: curriculum, systemic bias. There's a lot of work to be done, and we acknowledge that. So thanks a million. Really, really grateful, and so important for us as a community to be doing this work. And if I may say, at this time in particular.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
Such good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lila community, and for joining us tonight. Thanks again, Camille. We will pick up the conversation with you, and thank you to your associates for joining us tonight. I hope that's given them some insights into our incredibly invested Lila community.
Wonderful.
Good night, everyone.